The mountains shook with fire. Dust, blood, and shrapnel clawed at the sky as 387 Navy SEALs crouched low in a barren Afghan valley, surrounded on every ridge by an enemy that outnumbered them nearly 4-1. The ambush was perfect, merciless, suffocating, a noose that grew tighter with each passing second. Bullets tore through rock and bone. Men shouted for medics, for ammunition, for water. Yet in the chaos, there was no promise of help. Their radios crackled with static. The horizon burned. Above them, the sky was empty. One SEAL, his hand pressed against the gash in his side, whispered words that no soldier ever wants to believe. They were cut off. Command hesitated, weighing risks. Drones circled, blind to the sheer desperation below. In that moment, the men realized what so many do in war, that sometimes help never comes, that sometimes sacrifice is the only currency left. And then, just as despair began to calcify into resignation, a new voice cut through the static of their radios. Calm. Controlled. Female. A voice many had never expected to hear from a cockpit in the middle of a kill zone. She was already on her way. Her name was Captain Emily Ironhand Perez. To the SEALs bleeding in the dust, she was just a voice. To the enemy tightening their grip, she was an approaching storm. And to history, she would become something far greater. A pilot who risked everything, not for glory, not for recognition, but because she could not bear to let those men die surrounded and unseen. Her jet broke through the haze like a predator out of the clouds. Twin engines roared against the mountains, her A-10 Warthog painted in scars from missions that had already tested her beyond measure. To those below, her arrival was not quiet salvation but a thunderclap of possibility. Yet inside her cockpit, Emily's body was taut with conflict. She had been ordered to hold. Command feared collateral damage, political fallout, the stain of a miscalculated strike. The directive was clear: observe, circle, wait. But wait for what? For nearly 400 men to bleed out on foreign soil, their stories ended not in valor but in silence? She gripped the throttle until her knuckles whitened. Orders were one thing. Humanity was another. She had been here before, not in the valley, not in this exact firestorm, but in the crucible of hesitation. Years earlier, she had watched a convoy burn because a decision came too late, because someone far from the dirt and smoke had chosen to delay. She could still smell it even now, the scorched metal, the plastic melting into air, the sharp bite of cordite mixed with the stench of human loss. She remembered stepping out of her jet after that mission, helmet heavy in her hands, her heart heavier still, knowing she had obeyed but wishing she had acted. Her career had been a crucible forged from skepticism and doubt. A female pilot in a world that doubted her endurance, doubted her grit, doubted her worth. She remembered the glances, the quiet smirks, the words said behind closed doors. She wouldn't last, she wasn't strong enough, she was just a symbol in uniform. But Emily never fought back with words. She carried their doubt in silence, flew harder, trained longer, studied every rivet of the Warthog until she could sense its heartbeat as if it were her own. She was not loud. She was not showy. She simply outlasted them. Now, as fire chewed the valley floor and SEALs gritted their teeth against overwhelming odds, her silence became her strength again. She did not curse command. She did not beg for permission. She simply looked at the ground below and made her choice. The valley echoed with the cough of the Warthog's Gu-8 Avenger cannon, each round ripping into rock with a ferocity that broke the enemy's advance. Dust plumed like ghosts rising from the earth. Enemy fighters dove for cover, scrambling from positions they had thought impenetrable. For the first time in hours, the SEALs could lift their heads and see a sliver of hope cut across the sky. Command's voice exploded in her headset. Orders, reprimands, demands to pull back. She ignored them. She flew lower. Closer. So low that the men below swore they could see the streak of her visor, the determined tilt of her jaw. To her, they were not just numbers on a manifest. They were brothers pinned beneath fire, men who still had families waiting oceans away. She would not let them vanish into statistics. For minutes that stretched into eternities, Emily became a wall of steel and smoke between the SEALs and annihilation. She carved the ridges apart, her cannon thunder a hymn of defiance, her bombs placed with surgical precision that turned ambush into retreat. Yet each pass drew enemy fire upward, tracers lacing the air around her wings, missiles clawing for her fuselage. One clipped close, the shock rattling through her bones, alarms screaming in her cockpit. Still she flew back into the fire, refusing to climb away, refusing to let fear dictate. The rhythm of her heart. On the ground, seals pressed bloodied palms to the dirt and whispered words they had not spoken aloud in years. Thanks, prayers, promises. One of them, his arm bandaged with a strip of his own shirt, muttered that they owed their lives to a voice they had never met, a pilot they might never know. In that moment, silence fell among the survivors. Not silence from the battle, it raged still, but silence of realization. They had been written off. And yet, one person refused to let them go. Hours later, as medevac helicopters finally threaded through the valley to pull the wounded out, as the last rounds were fired and the dust began to settle, Emily landed her Warthog at a forward base, her jet riddled with scars. Mechanics stared at the holes punched through her fuselage, the trails of smoke that still curled from her wings. Command was waiting too, stern faces, clipped words, accusations of insubordination. She stood before them, helmet tucked under her arm, flight suit streaked with sweat. She did not argue. She did not defend. She simply held their gaze with the steady calm of someone who had made her choice and would make it again. The silence of her stance spoke louder than any defense. And slowly, against the weight of politics and protocol, word of what she had done spread. First among the SEALs she had saved, men who returned to their families, carrying with them a story that could not be silenced. Then among other pilots, soldiers, medics. Until eventually, it reached beyond bases and battlefields, whispered into homes where parents held onto folded flags, where children looked at photos of fathers who never returned. To them, Emily's defiance was not insubordination. It was salvation. In time, even her critics softened, realizing that what had seemed reckless was in fact the essence of service, to place others before oneself, to shoulder risk when others are too paralyzed to act. She never sought medals, though they came. She never sought recognition, though it followed. She only carried forward the same quiet conviction that had carried her through fire, that honor is proven not in what one says, but in what one chooses to do when silence is easier, when orders are safer, when obedience means watching others perish. When asked years later why she had risked everything, her words were few. She said only that sometimes silence can save, but other times silence can kill. And on that day, she chose not to be silent. The men who survived still tell the story with reverence. They do not describe the sound of her cannon, nor the shape of her jet. They describe the sight of her flying lower than seemed possible, the feeling that she would not leave until they lived. They describe her not as a pilot, but as a shield. And so the legacy of that valley was not one of defeat, nor of political hesitation, nor of forgotten sacrifice. It became a testament to one truth that outlives all orders, all ranks, all battles. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear dictate who is saved and who is lost. Today, when her name is spoken in hushed tones at reunions, or when one of those 387 men embraces a child who might never have been born if not for her defiance, there is a silence that follows, not of emptiness, but of respect. For they all understand that one person's choice can change the course of hundreds of lives. That one woman's refusal to wait transformed despair into survival. And so, the story endures. It is whispered in classrooms, in homes, in the quiet between generations. It reminds all who hear it that silent strength can become thunder, that sacrifice is the truest language of honor, and that sometimes the bravest act of all is to risk everything not for recognition, but for the lives of others. If you are hearing this story now, know that its weight is carried by every man who walked out of that valley alive, and by the memory of the woman who chose their survival over her own safety. Share where you listen from, reflect on what it means, and carry forward the truth it holds. Unseen heroes walk among us, often silent, often doubted, yet capable of changing everything when the world least expects it.